I want to thank Susie. How do I know Susie? I mean, we could say it's a coincidence, but we know nothing's a coincidence. Everything comes min hashamayim. Basically, Susie has a daughter called Shira, who made Aliyah. She's married with a 1-year-old. And Susie works for me at Jobkatif. Now, Shira works for me at Jobkatif. She's a wonderful person, and I love working with her. And she's a remarkable young woman, and I know where she gets it from. So, Susie, thank you very, very much. This is wonderful. I also felt it was very appropriate for me to speak in a place like Dani, because even though the details are different, the circumstances are definitely different, one of the wonderful things that Dani does is to provide employment for challenged populations. So population, you know, of physically and mentally challenged young adults, amongst other things that they do. So, and I thought that's great because it's about helping people through employment, and that's one of the key things that we try to do at Jobkatif. So, what is Jobkatif and how did it come about? We all know that in August of 2005, Israel unilaterally withdrew from the Gaza Strip, which meant that the almost 10,000 Jews who were living in the Yishuvim, they were living in 21 Yishuvim, were removed from their homes, and this was called Jobkatif. It was a very, very hard time, I think, it was a terribly hard time in Israel, and I believe it was hard for Jews living all over the world who care about Israel. And it caused tremendous, it caused a rift in the people, because there were people who said, this is a terrible thing, how can you do it? And then there were people who said, in the name of peace, you have to do anything. And having lived in Israel myself since 1977, I can honestly say that even though I don't necessarily agree with it, I can understand why there are Israelis who will say, I'll do anything for peace. Because I think today in Israel, I can honestly say there is not a single person who doesn't know somebody who was either killed or injured in a war or in a terrorist attack. We're a tiny country, and so many people have been affected by the terror and by the wars, especially with the terror attacks. You can understand that this causes certain people to say, we'll do anything, we just want to live in peace. And so again, I'm not saying I agree with it, but that was what was driving it. Anyway, it happened. The day after Tisha B'Av, on August 15, 2005, it began, and it took a few days. The government had said they would move the people to temporary homes. They had set up what they called caravillas, which were like sort of a bit like trailers, but they're not. Trailer is called in Hebrew a caravan, but because they put a roof on it, a red roof, they called it a caravilla. So it looks slightly nicer, but the insulation is terrible. In the winter, it's freezing in there. In the summer, it's boiling in there. You can, if you're angry, you can put your fist. It's a plasterboard wall. You can just put your fist through it. And they set up different locations throughout Israel, most of them in the south. The largest one was Nitzan, which is in the area of Ashkelon. And then there's another large group in Yad Binyamin, another one in Ein Surim. All of these are sort of south. And when I say south, remember we're talking about Israel. I mean, from me in my house in Tekoa, which is 10-15 minutes from Jerusalem, to drive to Yad Binyamin is 40 minutes. To get to Nitzan, it's less than an hour. I mean, Israel's tiny, so we're not talking tremendous distances. However, when the day came and they began removing the people, these temporary houses weren't ready. And so what they did was the government basically put people on buses and took them to different hotels and guest houses around the country. There were some people who I know people I've spoken to who said they were sitting on the bus for hours and the driver was waiting for instructions where to take them to. Which of course only added to the trauma of what was happening to them. It was bad enough that they were losing their houses, their communities, their shuls, which were then physically destroyed. In addition, they were refugees, and they had no clue where they were being taken to. The hotels were a solution at the time because in 2005, unfortunately, Israel was going through a horrible intifada, so there were very few tourists, so there were hotel rooms available. Jobkatif was founded by a wonderful, wonderful man called Rav Yosef Tzvi Rimon. Rav Rimon is a relatively young guy. I can say that because I'm much older than him. He's in his 40s, and he's a very dynamic person. I would call him a genius. He's a tzaddik, and he, like thousands of others, flocked to the hotels in Jerusalem, where a lot of the families had been brought in those day after, to see what he could do to help. And at that time, there were thousands of people coming to see the pictures on television of all these houses being destroyed and people crying. It was unbearable. He went, and Rav Rimon, in addition to everything I've said, is also, I would say, a genius. He's 10 steps ahead of everybody. He's not only the Rav of Alon Shvut, he also teaches at the Gush Yeshiva. He gives shurim all over the country, and he's also an expert in Jewish halakha, in Jewish law, and he writes books on Jewish law. And he's a very special individual, but most of all, he's a tzaddik and he cares about people.
What's his name again?
Rabbi Rimon, as in pomegranate, R-I-M-O-N. Now, he went to the hotels, and he basically got to the first hotel in Yerushalayim, and he asked to see the person who was dealing with the Gush Katif people, and he said he'd come to help, and he wanted to see what had been set up. He said, you know, you're going to have a lot of children here. Have you got any facilities for the kids? And they said, well, no, we're a hotel. And he said, you know, people, the families that in Gush Katif, they had a lot of children. I mean, 6, 7, 8 children was like average. There were some families with 10 children, 12 children. And they're all going into hotel rooms, which, you know, may sound nice, a hotel, but it's not nice if you're there with loads of kids. It's not nice. He said, what about laundry? And remember, this was a few days after Tisha B'Av, which meant if the family was religious, they hadn't done laundry for 2 weeks. You don't do laundry during the 9 days, other than what's really, really necessary. So they're going to have a lot of laundry. Have you got laundry facilities? And she said, well, we can help them with the laundry, but it's going to cost them money. And in other words, he realized that nothing had been set up. He went back to Alon Shvut, to his community, which is a very special community in Gush Etzion. He called an emergency meeting of the entire community. And he said to them, I've been to the hotels, and I can see that these people need help, and I'm recruiting every single one of you now. It was, remember, middle of August is still it's still vacation time in Israel. Schools are out until the beginning of September. And he said, and in Alon Shvut, there are a lot of women who work in education, teachers, kindergarten teachers. He said, all of you think you're on vacation, you're not on vacation anymore. He said, you're going to make up a rota, and you're going to go and you're going to take materials, and you're going to go and work with the kids. He said, I need people who can drive, and they're going to go pick up dirty laundry, bring it back to Alon Shvut. I want people who I want people to do the laundry, to dry it, to fold it, and then we'll take it back to them. He said, I want welcoming committees in every hotel, a man and a woman, a man to hug the man, a woman to hug the woman, with a cake, with words of encouragement. He says, I want maps. These people are being taken to a hotel away from, they don't know where they are. A map to show them where's the Ashkenazi shul, where's the Sephardi shul, where's the mikveh, where's there a bank, where is there a post office. I mean, they don't know anything. And he basically got it all arranged. He had volunteers, people helped him, and they really, within a week or two, they got it arranged. Rav Rimon would go very often, every day, to the hotels to see how things were going. He basically decided that this is what he had to do. And I was with him a few years ago. I've been working in Jobkatif myself now for 5 years. I've worked in many wonderful places in Israel. I've been very, very blessed with the work that I've done in Israel. And my background is employment. And I can honestly say, Jobkatif is by far the most wonderful place I've ever worked. And I was with Rav Rimon a few years ago when he was being interviewed by a journalist, and I was just listening. And the journalist said to him, Rav Rimon, how did you get into this? He said, you're a rabbi of a community, you know, you give shurim, you write books on halakha. What did you know about employment and retraining courses and opening up businesses? He said, the truth? Nothing. He said, but I was sitting there once I got everything organized and I looked around, and he said, I saw the light had gone out of their eyes. That was the expression he used. The light had gone out of these people's eyes. They were sitting there depressed. And he said, there is nothing worse for somebody who's already depressed, already traumatized, than to have no reason to get up in the morning, to have nothing to do. And he said, I realized that what they needed was employment. They needed jobs. And they needed jobs for two reasons, each one as important as the other. One was obviously for parnasa, to make a living. The other one is emotionally to give them something to do. And so he then went to the different government offices that had been charged with looking after these people and said to them, what are the plans? What special plans have you put in place to help these people get back to work? And here I have to tell you something very important that a lot of people don't realize. And this is key to understanding Jobkatif, and that is that when we think of what happened in Gush Katif, we remember those terrible pictures of houses being destroyed and so on. What a lot of people are not consciously aware of is that 85% of the people who lived in Gush Katif worked in Gush Katif. 85% of them. Which meant, and there was no unemployment in Gush Katif. Anybody who wanted a job could get a job. There was tremendous agriculture, as I'm sure you all know, and there were educational institutions, and people had stores and repair shops, and there was work. It was like a self-contained area. There was work. So overnight, not only did people lose their homes and their communities and their shuls and everything, they lost their source of income, and it was literally destroyed. It was literally flattened and destroyed. And he said, so what are you doing for these people? How are you going to get them back to work? You're now scattering them throughout the country. What are you doing with them? And the answers he got were not satisfactory. The answers he got were, well, you know, we have the government employment offices. Like any other Israeli, they can go to the government employment office. He said, no, you don't understand. The government employment office, I don't know what it's like here in Canada, but in Israel, a government employment office is very impersonal. You kind of go in, someone's sitting at a computer, types in, doesn't even look at you, types in your information. Oh, you're a plumber, no, we haven't got any jobs there, come back next week. That's not what they needed. They needed individual, one-on-one care. And as he said, coming back to this interview, he said to this journalist, he said, and when I realized that nothing was being done, I had to do it, because the Chachamim teach us that when you see a fellow Jew in need, and no one else is helping him, you are chayav. You have to, you are obligated to do it yourself. And I remember hearing that, and I got the shivers, because I thought, wow, how many times do we sit and watch television or read an article and we say, why don't they do this? Why don't they do that? It's always they. How often do we say, I'm going to do something about this? Maybe Susie did it, right? Susie did it. But these people are precious. These people are rare. And it wasn't as if Rabbi Rimon had time on his hands. He didn't. I don't know when the man sleeps. I really don't. And the next day he went to a hotel with his cell phone. This is how it all began. And he walked into the hotel. Of course, everybody knew him by then. And he said, I have an announcement to make. If there's anyone here who would like a job, it's going to be a temporary job, because at some point you're going to be moving to your temporary caravillas. Nobody knew when, and it took a long time to empty out the hotels. Some of them were in the hotels for months, some just for weeks. It depended on the family. And so, of course, it was very difficult to take a job because you couldn't tell the employer how long you could work at the job. But he said, if anybody wants to do something, meanwhile, come and speak to me. And the first person that came up to him was a man who said, I'm a carpenter, I had a carpentry business, a very successful carpentry business in Gush Katif. He said the whole thing was flattened, I've lost everything. He said, if I can find work meanwhile as a carpenter, I'd be very happy to earn some money and do something. And Rabbi Rimon thought, he said, I think I know someone. He made a call and got him a job. That was the first job placement. And after that, volunteers, there were a lot of people still coming to the hotel. The volunteers joined him. And somebody said, why don't we set up a database and take out an ad in the Hebrew newspaper saying, to asking employers that if they have jobs available, temporary jobs in the areas where the people are now, to send it to us, and maybe we could do some matching up, and they did that. And then by this time they were coming into Elul, into Chodesh Elul, and Rav Rimon was thinking, what temporary work can I find? And he suddenly realized that in Israel, especially in Yerushalayim, in Elul and in Tishrei, you've got a seasonal business of Sukkot, of making the sukkahs, selling the sukkahs, the arba minim, and there's a lot of work in that. And he contacted several people, and in one day he found work for about 50 people, and that's how it started. And at that point, Rav Rimon really had no idea that he was setting up an organization. He didn't expect this would happen. But in fact, he was setting up an organization because word spread and people kept contacting him and saying, I need a job, I need this, I need that. And that is how Jobkatif began and is still going today.
What do you call it?
Jobkatif.
Jobkatif.
Yeah, jobs for people from Gush Katif. It's written on the front of the brochure.
Okay.
Now, over the years, we've had to adapt our methods and what we do to meet the changing needs of the people. So if at the beginning you had somebody like this carpenter saying, I want to work, later on you had somebody saying, I'd like to work, but what I did in Gush Katif is irrelevant now. I was helping in an agricultural business to grow bug-free lettuce. I mean, what am I going to do with that? Or I was working in security. There was a lot of security there. Remember, it wasn't. They didn't have great neighbors there in Gush Katif. And so we realized at that point that people would have to be retrained. And so then we set up a system whereby we would meet with people, our counselors, employment counselors, meet with people and help them work out an employment direction, and then look for a course that could help give them a vocational training course to give them a direction and give them basically a profession, and afterwards look for a job. And we've helped, I would say something, it must be over 500 people do professional retraining courses. We help fund the courses. We never pay for all of it. We always, it's not good to pay for everything. It's always good that the person pays a little bit themselves, but depending on the need, the cost of the course, we pay for the courses. Here I would like to say, by the way, that just as an aside, I've been to Toronto many times, and I love coming to Toronto because I find the community to be not only warm with lovely people, but very Zionist, very supportive of the Gush Katif cause, and understanding. When I go to America to fundraise, very often I have to explain to the people I'm talking to why these people needed to be helped. They don't get it. In Toronto, I started doing that, and people said to me, you don't have to tell us why. We know they need help. And we also are very, very generously funded by the Friedberg Foundation, if you know who they are. Don and Nancy Friedberg were wonderful philanthropists. They helped you too. They are wonderful, wonderful people.
And where do they live?
Sorry?
Are they local?
No, they live further south. They live further south.
But they're Canadian?
Yeah, in Toronto, sure. And they have a big foundation, and they're very generous philanthropists, and the program of ours that they like is retraining courses. They're very big on education. They like the idea of education to help people make their way in life, and oh, thank you so much. And that was the retraining courses. Then we began to be approached by people who said, I had my own business in Gush Katif. 70% of the people who lived in Gush Katif, it's very high, 70% were self-employed, either in agriculture or they had stores. A lot of people had small stores. It was very contained. In other words, if you needed to buy a book, there was a bookstore. You needed to buy a gift, there was a gift store. You needed to buy clothes, there was a clothes store. And people had stores, or like this carpenter, there was a carpenter who had his own business, a plumber, an electrician, a garage to fix your car, whatever it was. And these people came to us and said, look, I've been self-employed all my life. It's very hard for me to go work for somebody now. So we set up a business department. And we sit with the people, we have business consultants, and we sit with the people, and we think, you know, they have an idea for a new business. We make them do a business plan. It's not like, oh, fine, you know, we'll help you. We check if the business is going to be viable. We vet it very, very carefully, because if we don't think the business is going to be viable, why help them? Why waste their time and money, and why waste our time and money? We'll tell them, don't do it. It's not going to work. If we do think it's going to work, we give them mentoring and counseling and seed money to start the business off. And we've helped open almost 250 new small businesses throughout Israel, from the Golan all the way down to the Negev, all over and in fact the brochure the colourful brochure that's on the side there focuses mostly on some of these businesses. Some of them are very interesting businesses, very creative. We also have another program which is called the Volunteer Program. This was something we only introduced a couple of years ago, and this program is to help people who need to get to work, but we know that no employer is going to take them because they're not emotionally ready. And to illustrate this, I'll tell you a small story. This is a true story about the first person we put in the volunteer program. This was a man who was older. He was already in his mid to late 50s. He had been one of the pioneers of growing bug-free vegetables in Gush Katif. I'm sure you all know that one of the amazing things that happened in Gush Katif was that they developed a method to grow vegetables that had no bugs in them, which for people who keep kashrut is extremely important, because it's very forbidden to eat insects. And he was one of the pioneers of this, and he had a farm that was very, very successful, and he was so proud of it. And in general, he was totally broken after he was pulled out of Gush Katif. He was one of these people who had no reason to get up in the morning. He would walk around all day in his pajamas, eat, gained weight, developed health problems. This caused tension in the family. Remember, it's like a downward kind of spiral. It caused tension in the family. We kept trying to send counselors, counselors to speak to him, and they only talked to him about different options. And every time they came, he'd say, I only want to do one thing. I want to grow bug-free vegetables. Don't talk to me about anything else. That's what I know how to do. I think in general, for the people who worked in agriculture, I think they took it the hardest, because the agriculture in Gush Katif was like the jewel on the crown of Israel's agriculture. I mean, if you take the fact sheet there that says, did you know, you'll see the statistics. The percentage of Israel's agricultural exports that came out of Gush Katif is far, far exceeds the proportion. It was a tiny little area. It had the largest flower nursery in the whole of the country. It exported 95% of Israel's bug-free vegetables. 70% of Israel's organic vegetables came from Gush Katif. And then we're talking about a tiny little piece of land. I mean, the agriculture was so successful, and here I must make an aside. I think you had mentioned Anita Tucker. There's this wonderful woman called Anita Tucker who was one of the first people she's originally from Brooklyn. She was one of the first people to arrive in Gush Katif in 1970. She came with her husband and children, and there was nothing there, it was just sand. And little mobile homes that had been set up, and this is when the government had invited and was encouraging people. Please note this. A lot of people in the world say, well, they shouldn't have been there in the first place. It was illegal. It was not illegal. The government invited them and encouraged them to come there. They moved there, and she told me once that a few weeks after they'd been there, there was, the kids were having a wonderful time rolling in the sand dunes, because that's all there was there. There was sand dunes and the sea. By the way, it was the best beaches in Israel. I don't know if anybody was there. The beaches were out of this world. We don't have such nice, but the beaches there were wonderful. And she said they suddenly saw 3 Arab sheikhs approaching them, bearing bread and salt, which is the sign of peace. And they came and they said, we welcome you. And we like the fact that you Israelis are coming to live here because we hope that you will be setting up some kind of industry and you can employ some of our villagers, because our villagers have no work and they're very poor, and this will really help them. And they said, fine. They said, but we're actually not going into industry, we're going into agriculture. She lived in a place called Netzach Hazani, which was one of the first yeshuvim in Jobkatif. And she herself was known as the cabbage and celery lady because she was the farmer, her husband was a teacher. She ran the farm. And the Arabs said, agriculture? Don't you know that in Arabic we call this the bitter land? Nothing can grow here. And she said when she heard that, they got really worried. They thought, oh my goodness, maybe we're making a mistake. Maybe we shouldn't be doing agriculture. But, and I spoke about this yesterday at Sudah Shlishit, at Bayit. I believe that there is such a strong bond between Hashem, the land of Israel, and the Jewish people, that the land of Israel knows when Jewish people are planting things, and it responds and things blossom. Because, and the reason first of all, if you look at the history of Israel, you'll see that every time Jews lived there, the land flourished. For 2,000 years when the Jews weren't there, it was desolate. We know this from writings, it was totally desolate. Can we argue that when there were non-Jews there, they didn't care about the land and try and plant? Possibly. But all I can tell you is that Anita told me that she's still in touch with some of the Arabs from Gaza who worked for her and who knew all the methods that they used. They used a method called they developed this method called hydroponic. And they call her and they say, we're doing everything the way you did it, and nothing is growing. Nothing's growing. It's not growing for us. It's not working. And the agriculture, by the way, employed in Gush Katif 10,000 people, 5,000 Jewish people and 5,000 Arabs. And these 5,000 Arabs, by the way, are unemployed now. They have no work. So that's an aside. And I can't even remember how I got to this. Yes, going back to the guy with the bug-free lettuce. So when we opened up our volunteer program, we sent a counselor to speak to him, but before he went to him, he did some homework, and he found a moshav not too far away from where he was living. And he went to him, and this moshav, they were growing bug-free vegetables. By the way, in Israel today, you can still buy Gush Katif lettuce, Gush Katif parsley, Gush Katif celery. It's become branded. It's not grown in Gush Katif anymore, but it's what you talk about when you write your shopping list. Oh, get some Gush Katif parsley, get some Gush Katif lettuce, and that's what it says on the packet. It's just not from Gush Katif anymore. But the farmers over Israel are still growing it because there's a demand for it in Israel and also for export. So this farmer at this moshav was growing it, and our counselor said to him, look, would you like a volunteer? He's an older man, but he is one of the pioneers of growing bug-free vegetables. I'm sure he can help you. It won't cost you anything. I said, sure. Then the counselor went back to this gentleman and said to him, I've got an offer to make you. He said, I found a place where you can volunteer and you can help grow bug-free vegetables, but you have to commit to 5 days a week, 6 hours a day. We'll pay you a small stipend and we'll help you with travel. Take it or leave it. And he said, I'll do it. And he began working there. Within 2 months, he was offered a full-time position there. They were thrilled to have him. He was an expert. He was offered a full-time position. He lost weight. His health improved. His wife rings the office once a month to thank us for saving her marriage. She said she was on the point of divorcing him. She said she couldn't take the tension in the house anymore. And they've begun building their house, and that's what our volunteer program is. It's to help people, because we couldn't have taken this person and sent him to an employer. Nobody would have employed him. But this way we got him into a job. This is what we do at Jobkatif. Thank God we have helped nearly 2,500 people find work. We are nearing completion of our mission. Our mission is to help as many people as possible. We are left with 600 families who are still not making ends meet. Again, if you take the sheets, you'll see how we've broken it down. We know what we have to do in order to get these people back on their feet. This is our mission, to get people back on their feet so they're independent and they are once again contributing members of society. For the first few years of Jobkatif's life, we were entirely supported by donations, mostly from North America. In those first few years, 2005, 6, 7, there were people that you just had to say to them, Gush Katif, and they couldn't get their checkbook out quick enough because it hurt and they wanted to help. Unfortunately, as time went by, people said, oh yeah, time's gone by, they should be fine by now, and donations dropped off. Plus, there was a big financial crisis in America which affected our donations. We began, two things sort of have changed in the last few years. Number one, we began fundraising in Israel. And in Israel there is more awareness. There is much more awareness of what's happening with the people, because people like you who know about Jobkatif, who are in touch with Israel, you know what the reality is. You ask your average Jewish person in North America and they'll say, Gush Katif? That was years ago, I'm sure they're all fine now. But they're not. And so we began fundraising in Israel, and in Israel there's more awareness because every few months there's an article in a newspaper or on the radio, and people know that even people who thought it was a good idea at the time and still think it's a good idea, there's a consensus that the people were treated shabbily. There's a consensus. And we set up a telemarketing center where we employ women, and some men too, people from Gush Katif, and they call up people at home, and the strategy is get a lot of people to give a small amount of money. So somebody calls up and says, I used to live in Gush Katif, I'm phoning on behalf of Jobkatif, and they give the spiel. Very often the response is, because a lot of Israelis, you know, in Israel, Baruch Hashem, people work and so on, but a lot of Israelis, there are very rich Israelis, and we do get some large donations, but by and large, your average Israeli family, I mean, I'm sure you know, they don't have lots of money to throw around. And they say, I just can't really afford to give you much. So then we say, okay, but how about if you make a standing order for a year, for 2 years, give us 50 shekel a month, 18 shekel a month, a small amount. And people can commit to that. It's a small amount, they don't feel it. But you get thousands of people to give you a small amount every month, it adds up. And last year, 2012, 60% of our donations came from Israel. 60%. 60% came from North America. So just be aware of that. And this is something I know that North Americans like hearing, because the last few years, people have been saying to me, why don't you get the Israelis to donate? You know, why Israel's economy is doing much better than America. And it's true, but they don't have that much money. But Baruch Hashem, we've done that. The other watershed for us was government support. From the beginning, Rav Rimon was trying to get government funding. He was basically going to the government and saying, you know, we're doing your work. Can you not fund us? And everybody was very sympathetic and write us a letter about this and send us a report about this, bureaucracy and that. Nothing came through. And the catalyst came in the summer of 2009. I would say even before that. In 2008, Rav Rimon received the Presidential Award for Volunteerism from Shimon Peres, which was very ironic, because Shimon Peres was and is still in favor of giving up Gush Katif. Yeah? But he doesn't decide who gets it. There's a committee, and the committee picked Rav Rimon. And in 2008, so this gave him already, it gave him and Jobkatif some kind of standing. A year later, when Bibi Netanyahu was Prime Minister, he set up a State Commission of Inquiry into how were the people treated, not into should it have happened, because that was, it's a bit pointless to look into that. But how were the people treated? And one of the areas, and this State Commission of Inquiry had the standing of a legal court. There were 3 judges presiding. The main one was a very well-known Israeli judge called Yehoshua Matzah. And And one of the areas they looked into housing, they looked into social, education, social issues, but they also looked into employment. And it was actually, I read, all the transcripts were online, and I could, I read them. And by the way, if you go to our website, you can actually, we translated into English the testimony that Rav Rimon gave, and it's worth reading. It's absolutely worth reading. But they, first of all, when it came to employment, they summoned people from the Israeli government, from the Ministry of Employment. And every time they asked them a question, they said, well, what happened with this, or how many of this, and where do you get this statistic? The answer was coming in again and again. Oh, no, we don't do that. Jobkatif does that. No, we get our statistics from Jobkatif, and it's true. I remember getting calls every few months from somebody from the ministry saying, can you give me the latest statistics? Because they weren't doing anything. We were doing it all. And eventually one of the judges said, what's Jobkatif? Who's Jobkatif? What is this? And it was explained, and then they summoned Rav Rimon to come and give testimony. And as I said, I recommend that you read his testimony because it's fascinating. And he gave testimony, and when the Commission of Inquiry published its findings, Jobkatif came out smelling like roses. They made 4 points. Number one, they said there's 3 times more unemployment amongst the people of Gush Katif than amongst the average Israeli population. Number 2, it's a direct result of the disengagement. Well, what do you know? I mean, of course it's a direct result, but it was the first time anybody officially said it. Until that point, nobody had said it officially. Number 3, they said, the State of Israel and the Ministry of Employment have failed in solving the problem. And number 4, the only organization doing this work, and there is no organization finding them work. There are other organizations helping people from Gush Katif. No one else is helping people find jobs, or businesses, or retraining courses. No one else is doing it. So they're the only ones doing it, and they're doing it well. And their recommendation, the Israeli government should fund Jobkatif. That was their recommendation. And we thought, Baruch Hashem, we're not fundraising. However, the Israeli government was not duty-bound to take. They had to relate to the recommendation, but not necessarily do exactly what was recommended. And instead of that, they took the recommendation and they made then we signed an agreement with them by which they match our donations and basically triple our donations, and which is a wonderful thing. It's wonderful that, and by the way, it's quite unprecedented. It's not that uncommon for organizations to have their donations matched one-on-one. But to have it tripled is quite unprecedented. 3 to 1, yeah. So that is amazing. But the onus is still on us. In other words, I have to raise the money. We then have to spend the money on our employment programs. We then have to report to the government in the finest, minute detail exactly how the money was spent. And by the way, it made us extremely efficient. Our records have to be, we're under a microscope, and so in a way it was good. And then they go through it with a fine-tooth comb, and then they give us the money. That's basically how the agreement works. And so the onus is on us to bring in the money, and we're now in a fight against time because the agreement is scheduled to end at the end of this year, December 31st, 2013. We have asked for an extension for 1 more year. We said we've got 600 families left. Give us another year. They haven't said yes, but they haven't said no. So it's a 50-50 chance as to whether or not they're going to extend. We'll probably find out the last minute. Knowing Israel, probably like the 29th of December we'll find out. But we have to assume at the moment that the agreement is going to run out, and then we're going to be in trouble. And so that's one of the reasons I'm here in North America. I myself, by the way, am not a fundraiser by profession. I think I mentioned to you, my profession is employment and management and employment. I began my career in Israel working with Olim, with the new immigrants, and then I went on to direct for 15 years. I was the director of the Jerusalem Employment Center for Olim. I helped Baruch Hashem, we ran a whole program to help Olim find jobs. And then I had a few other jobs. I worked for Nefesh B'Nefesh for a while and so on. And then Rav Rimon asked me to come on as director. And at the beginning, I was running Jobkatif. I wasn't, I had someone else who was doing the fundraising. But once this agreement was signed with the government, Rav Rimon called me to a meeting and said, Judy, he said, systems are in place, Jobkatif is running well, because I brought in a lot of changes. He said, and I trained the staff how to deal with changing needs. He said, I want you to give over the day-to-day running to someone else, and you focus on the fundraising, because if we don't raise money, then the government doesn't give us money. And you speak English. So I said, Rav Rimon, I'm not a fundraiser. He said, you'll learn. And when Rav Rimon says to you, you'll learn, you have to learn. So yeah, I started reading books and talking to people, and I subscribed to blogs, and that's what I'm doing now, is I'm raising funds, and not just here, as I said, I'm also in charge of raising funds in Israel.
How is the staff paid, etc., etc.? How are you paid? How Rav Rimon paid? How everything?
It comes from donations. So we have a 15% overhead. If anybody says to me, how much of the money that you raise goes to employment programs, it's 85%. That's the truth. And and sometimes people say to me, well, that's high, 15%. But the truth is that, people say, how much money goes to the cause? To the cause, 100%. We don't do anything else. But you need the staff. We need administrative staff to send the government all the paperwork so that they'll give us the money. And I need to be able to come here and talk to people to raise money. Without that, the organization's not going to work. So I know there's this thing of overhead. By the way, we also have volunteers working for us. We try as much as we can to work with volunteers. And I can tell you with absolute truth, we don't get paid a lot. I'm not doing this for the money. Believe me, we don't get paid a lot. We get, in Israel, you can do wonderful work, and we don't get paid a lot. But we get paid a lot in satisfaction. One of the wonderful things that was introduced last year, and is also the Friedberg Foundation, is that last year, with funds we received from the Friedberg Foundation, we were able to send 110 young people who are second generation Jobkatif to university, to get university education, because who pays for university education? Usually it's the parents. The parents can't afford to pay it. And this was so thrilling. This was I felt one of the best things that we had done, because we are basically ensuring the future of these young people. In Israel, if you have university education, you're going to get a job. You may not become Rothschild, you may not become a millionaire, because in Israel you don't earn that much money, but you'll get a job. Because I know there are many countries in the world that even if you have a university education, you don't get a job. In Israel, you get a job. Baruch Hashem, the economy is doing well, and if you have a degree, you'll get a job. And a couple of months ago, I applied again to the Friedberg Foundation, and I asked if it was possible to repeat it. And just before I came away, I got a positive response, and we're going to be funding another 110 people this year. And it's amazing. It's incredible that we're able to do this. And this is being done also through Jobkatif. And that's basically who we are. At this point, I'd like to show you the movie. Unless you have any questions? Yeah, sure.
You have a very common model for high school.
Well, yes, charity.
I was curious if there's any.
No, but it's a fascinating.
Yeah, no, I've been.
And I tell you, one of the most fascinating things about it is that it's actually very chilling, because they have their copies of papers that show how precisely the soldiers and the policemen, who, by the way, I feel very sorry for.
Yeah.
I feel very sorry for them, because they're traumatized. I have another movie that, it's not this movie I'm showing you, but if you'd like to see it, I can show it to you.
Yeah, sure.
Which shows the policemen and soldiers were basically crying their eyes out.
I can imagine.
It was a terrible thing for them to have to do.
Yeah.
But in these papers in the museum, it shows how every detail had been addressed in the actual removal of the people. They had files on every single family. They knew about every family. They had been prepared emotionally, psychologically. It was done with such precision. Every I was dotted, every T was crossed. Unfortunately, from the moment they got them onto the buses,
that wasn't done in the plan at all.
So Judy, how many people, let's say right now, are still paying mortgages on their old homes as well as maybe paying?
I don't know. I don't have that statistic. I can't tell you. If you want, I can try and find it out for you and email you, but I don't have that statistic.
But some are still paying mortgages on their own home, and they're paying rent on their new home.
Right?
And they may not still have a job.
Now, I think what happened was, listen, you've got, as far as permanent housing goes, you've got three categories of people. You've got people who've already moved into their new homes. Thank God people are beginning to move into their new homes. You've got people who are in the process of building or buying their new home. And then you've got people who haven't got any money and can't do anything. Now, as far as the people who have moved or are moving into new homes, probably what they did was they transferred that mortgage and added it to another mortgage and are paying that back now. It's one lump sum, do you understand? Now, as far as the people, however, but by the way, the government's going to hit a very big problem because in Nitzan it's well known that there's quite a number of people who did not find work, and what did they do? Anybody who got the compensation for their homes, if they were thinking clearly, which very few people were at the time, they took that sum of money, locked it into a savings account, and said, we're not touching this until we need it for our home. We have to get jobs to live on. But it didn't happen. And so very many people took that sum of money that they got as compensation for their homes, which wasn't a fortune, but it was money, and they put it into their bank account. They said, oh look, we've got money. And they lived off that money and used it up. They ate away at it, and now they can't afford homes. And I don't know what the government's going to be doing with them. I don't know, because we know for a fact, in other words, and one of the jobs of our counsellors is, by the way, we introduce a lot of very innovative methods, and first of all, most of our job counsellors, whether we pay them or whether they're volunteers, lived in Jobkatif themselves, and we trained them, and that was a very good move because there was an immediate trust, an immediate bond, because for some reason the people of Jobkatif didn't really trust the Israeli government for a while, you know, so number one. And number two, another thing that we do is we're very unbureaucratic. We don't have an office with reception hours and you have to make an appointment to come and see. It doesn't exist. We go to their caravillas, we go to their homes, and we speak to them. And first of all, this is more informal. They sit with them over a cup of coffee and they build trust and work with them that way. But secondly, there's another reason for doing that. By doing that, they can look around them and see what's going on in the whole family. So if a counsellor goes to somebody's home and knows that for the last few years neither husband or wife has been working, and yet the kids are wearing new sports shoes and you know, they look like, you know, they've got a nice big television, they say, hold on a minute, where are you getting your money from? So, oh, I've got money in my bank account. They said, well, what are you going to do when you have to build a house? Because very few people were thinking clearly. I remember speaking to a woman, a very smart woman with a master's, she makes movies. She said, Judy, for 6 months after the expulsion, I could not read a newspaper headline and understand what it meant. She lost a power of concentration. She was so traumatized that she couldn't think straight. And this is what happens to people. I've spoken to people, by the way, who, God forbid, suddenly a spouse dies, and it's a terrible shock. When you have a terrible shock, what happens to you is basically stop functioning. And this is what happens.